And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always, to the end of the age." In the beginning, the goddess Namu looked over the void of chaos and created the gods An and Ki, heaven and earth. And they came together to form Enlil, which was the god of breath, almost like the Holy Spirit, the god of air. And the god of air hovered over the deep and continued to create. And Enlil eventually gave birth to the moon and the sun. Actually, his wife Ninlil gave birth to the moon and the sun and the celestial gods in the sky. And to the east of the land where all this was happening, there was a place called Dilmun. Dilmun was a paradise, somewhere up to the east and on top of some mountain where they really didn't exactly know where it was, but they knew that somewhere this paradise existed out there. Well, one day, Enki and Ninhursag came together, and they were at this drunken banquet of the gods. And as they're drinking their ale or whatever they had back then, they were complaining of what hard work it was to dig trenches and to farm the land, and that they needed somebody to do it for them. So out of clay, they created human beings. 6 human beings that were very imperfect, very screwed up, really. One of them was so bad that only Ninhursag could feed it, because they were so misformed. So these humans were created as slaves to appease the gods and do their work for them. Well, this, in addition to a man named Ziusudra. Ziusudra came from these misformed creations, these human beings, the first ones. And eventually there was a great flood because the gods got tired of these messed up humans. They decided they needed a redo, and they needed to make them better the second time. And so they wiped everybody out except for Ziusudra, who was up on a mountaintop and was able to survive the flood. And so Ziusudra was blessed by the gods to almost become godlike, because he was the only human to survive. And from him came the descendants of the modern humans. This is the creation account according to Sumerian mythology, Sumerian religion. The Sumerians were the culture of people who pre-existed or preceded the Israelites. They were in Mesopotamia. And eventually they kept getting conquered again and again by the Babylonians. And finally, in about 2050 BC, the Babylonians came and took them out for one last time. At that time, the capital of Sumeria was Ur. And it said that a certain man named Abram and his wife Sarai, or Abraham and Sarah, came out of Ur and were sent by God to the land of Canaan, which eventually would become Israel. Well, when the Babylonians came in for the last time, they took the Sumerian religion and they changed it to their own. They adopted a lot of the gods, but the stories changed. For example, Enlil supposedly got together with a dragon named Tiamat, and they had a child named Marduk. Well, you'll see that in the Babylonian religions, goddesses pretty much disappeared, and if they were there, they got wiped out because there was no place for female deities. It became more male-dominated, much more violent. And so you get in the story that Marduk and his mother are competing over creation. They're competing to see who can create the most and the fastest. And eventually there's a battle, and Marduk kills his mother and splits her in half with the sword. And he takes one half of her and creates the heavens, and one half and creates the earth. Fast forward a little bit, we've got the Babylonian captivity. We talked about that before in about 586. Eventually, a king named Cyrus, king of the Persians, comes and saves the Israelites from the Babylonians. So it's 539 BC, Cyrus comes in. The Israelites regard him as the Messiah. They say that this man is the Messiah who has come to save us, because after he defeats the Babylonians, he starts sending the Israelites back home to Israel. The interesting thing is, they had a religion called Zoroastrianism. And this is what Cyrus and his people adhered to. And so you have the Sumerians and Babylonian Council of Gods. All of a sudden, you have the Persians who say, no, there is one God who created the heavens and the earth. And there is one almost godlike presence, this Angramanyu, who is like the devil, like we would call it in modern times. And that the cosmos is three tiered. There's heaven, there's earth, and there's a hell. If you're good, you go up. If you're bad, you go down. And eventually, God will come and send, actually 3 messiahs, I believe, who would go and wipe out all of evil in this big battle. And once that was done, paradise would exist once again here on the earth. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Should. One thing that troubles a lot of people is when you look at the account of Genesis, okay? We see all of these pieces that the Israelites, the Hebrew people, took from other religions and adopted for their own. But we look at it and we think, yes, but it's different. Okay, we might have adopted a little bit, but ours is the one real and true God. Yahweh is the one. So all these other things are fake. So we're okay. I mean, yeah, they are kind of similar, but I can get over that discomfort because I know I'm right and they were wrong. Okay, but one troubling thing is, why is it that we have 2 different accounts of the creation? Russ read 2 separate stories. I don't know if you noticed that or not. The first one had a chronological order in 7 days of how the heavens and the earth were created. Okay? And then you've got the human created at the same time. There was no Adam and then Eve in the first account. Humans, Adam, which means humankind, was created together. God, he created them, man and woman, he created them, right? Then in the second account, you don't get this chronological order, and there's not so much talk of the creations of the heavens and the earth. It's just on the earth, creates Adam, creates the animals aren't a good enough partner for Adam, so then he creates Eve out of Adam's rib. Okay? 2 very different accounts. But what's worse, or better, I think, let us create humankind in our image. What the heck is that? Some would go back and say, well, it's proof of the Trinity. Today's Trinity Sunday, so it kind of makes sense that they would put that lectionary for today. Oh, of course, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, the 3 of them creating together. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Okay, makes perfect sense. Whew, glad we got rid of that tension. I don't think so. They were borrowing from their context in which they lived there in Canaan, who had adopted all of these earlier religions. They were speaking from a council of gods. Let us create humans in our image. It wasn't so different than the other religions around them at the time. The thing that we miss out in reading it in English, and I don't mean to bore you to this, it's more like teaching than preaching, but I think it's very interesting that the word they use for God is Elohim. I-am, is plural. You got seraphim and cherubim and all these other words that have im at the end in Hebrew. It means plural. So when they said God, it meant God's. But then in the second account, instead of Elohim, you get the word Yahweh used for God, which is a proper name. Okay? So Elohim means gods in general. Yahweh is the name, the proper name of the one God. Well, it starts to make a little bit of sense when you see when these passages were written. Although they're inside of Genesis, they were written at very different times. Okay? And when you see that some of the passages, like from Deuteronomy, and even some of these parts of Genesis, were written after the Babylonian captivity, okay? Then you find the book of Daniel that's written about the time they're coming from Persia back to, or when the Persians come into Babylonia, and they're taking them back to Israel. You start to see this apocalyptic language in Daniel, You see this evolution, we call the evolution of creation or the evolution of belief, and everything changes, but it starts to make sense by how they're influenced by those around them. Well, how then is our account unique? If we just went and stole everybody else's religious ideas and put it down and made a beautiful little story, what makes us special? We're just copying everybody. Let us create humankind in our image. Or as we have sometimes translated it to the English, let me create humankind in my image. The imago Dei, the image of God. We as human beings, we believe from our creation accounts that we were created in God's image. But what the heck is so important about that? Do we look like God? Is that what that means? We're created in the image of God. So if we were somehow to snap a Polaroid or if God photobombed a picture when we're at the Sox game and wait, that's God in the picture, then we'd say that we look alike, right? No, I don't think so either. We look like God because we can create like God. We were told in the beginning that we have dominion over the earth. That humankind, not one man named Adam, humankind, dominion over the earth, which meant a responsibility. A responsibility to care for and to preserve the creation that preceded us. But one step further. We were charged with the responsibility of continuing to create. See, we think of God as creating ex nihilo, out of nothing. God took nothing and turned it into something. But that is not in this text. It doesn't say that. It says there was chaos. And from chaos, God created order. From nothing, not the lack of presence of something, nothing being nothing ordered because nobody had acted upon it to bring order to it. There were endless possibilities, but it took God acting upon it, speaking it into existence to make a creation. We as human beings have that power. We have that ability. When we look around us outside, we can see chaos wherever we go, but we have the power and the responsibility to speak into it, to act into it, and to create out of that chaos, to create order. It's like Margaret Mead said. She said, never underestimate the ability of a small group of passionate people or committed people to do the ultimate good. That's my paraphrase, to do the ultimate good. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Jesus, we look at his text and we look at the Great Commission and we think that these are totally unrelated stories that have nothing to do with one another, but they have everything to do with one another. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations. Disciples aren't believers. Disciples have nothing to do with believing. The only thing that has to do with believing is believing that something can come out of this nothing. That this chaos can somehow be formed into something good, something useful, something redeemed. That is the belief the disciples have. But they don't stop there. Disciples act. Disciples take from the teachings and the example of their teacher, and they go out and they act. They create. They speak into the nothingness. They reach into the chaos. They go into the form of the void where everything is scary and mysterious and hopeless, and they pull something beautiful out of it. That is our creation story. That is a story that tells us that God still creates today if we so choose to act upon it, because God creates through us. God still speaks. God still does. And God will always use human beings in relationship. Let us make humankind in our image, because we are in relationship one to another, creating good where there was nothing. And that, friends, is our task, our mission, should we choose to accept.